All right, let's dive right in. We're going to talk about a 2,000-year-old clay pot that could literally rewrite history. Now, at first glance, is it just a simple jar? Or is it proof of a technology so incredibly advanced that it was lost to the world for almost 2,000 years?
So, think back to science class. We all learned that the electric battery was invented way back in the year 1800 by a guy named Alessandro Volta, right? But what if that date was completely wrong, like by almost 2,000 years? It sounds crazy, I know, but that's the unbelievable possibility raised by this one little artifact, the Baghdad Battery. Okay, so picture this. It's the 1930s, and archaeologists digging near Baghdad stumble upon a few of these, well, kind of plain-looking clay pots. But the design was simple, and honestly, a little weird. Inside each one, there was a copper cylinder, and right in the middle of that, an iron rod. And the whole thing was sealed shut with a plug of asphalt. You gotta ask yourself, why? What was this thing for? At first, nobody really knew what to make of them. They were just cataloged as some kind of storage vessel and pretty much forgotten about. But then, one museum director came along and proposed an idea, a hypothesis so wild, so bold, it sounded like something straight out of science fiction. And that man was Wilhelm Koenig, the director of the National Museum of Iraq at the time. He's the one who first floated this radical idea. See, he looked at the three key parts. You've got two different metals and a sealed container, and something just clicked. He saw something incredibly familiar. He saw a battery, an ancient, honest-to-goodness galvanic cell. Okay, but a battery is pretty useless without something to power, right? So what on earth could ancient people have been doing with even a tiny bit of electricity? Well, the leading theory is something called electroplating. Basically, it's a process where you chemically fuse a super thin layer of gold onto a cheaper metal, like silver. To them, it would have seemed like some kind of high-tech magic, letting artists create these gorgeous, priceless-looking items really, really efficiently. And you know what? The science behind how it might have worked is surprisingly simple. All you'd have to do is fill the jar with a mild acid. We're talking something common they would have had, like vinegar or grape juice. That liquid acts as what we call an electrolyte. It kicks off a chemical reaction between the two different metals, the copper and the iron, and voila, you get a steady, small electrical current. But listen, a theory is one thing. Proof is something else entirely. I mean, if this thing really was a battery, then a modern replica, built with the exact same materials, should be able to do one simple thing: generate power. So, naturally, researchers decided to put it to the test. And what did they find? The answer is a resounding yes. It actually works. Tons of researchers, even TV shows, have built replicas of the Baghdad Battery using the exact same kind of materials. And guess what? When they pour in an electrolyte like vinegar, the thing produces a measurable voltage. The basic science is totally sound.
Okay, but let's manage our expectations a little. We're not talking about enough juice to light up a city, or even a single light bulb. Not even close. These replicas, they typically generate about half a volt of electricity. It's a tiny, tiny amount of power. But, and this is the really important part, it could be just enough for that delicate kind of work we were talking about, like electroplating. However, this is where the story gets really interesting. Because for every compelling argument for the battery theory, mainstream archaeology has a pretty strong counterargument. Let's just say the scientific community is, well, they're far from convinced.
Yeah, this really gets to the heart of the whole debate. On one hand, the argument for it being a battery is pretty straightforward. All the necessary parts are there, and like we said, modern replicas actually work. But the argument against it points to some pretty huge missing pieces. For one, archaeologicals have never, ever found any wires or conductors you'd need to actually use the electricity. And maybe even more damning, they've never found a single object from that period that was definitely electroplated. So, if it wasn't a battery, then what was it? Well, the leading alternative theory is a lot less exciting, but maybe more plausible. A lot of archaeologists think these were simply high-quality storage jars for sacred scrolls. I mean, it makes sense, right? The asphalt seal would have been a great waterproof cap, and that inner cylinder, it might have just been a little spindle to keep a papyrus scroll from getting crushed. So that's where we're left. We've got two completely different explanations. One is absolutely extraordinary, and the other is, well, pretty ordinary. And even after decades of debate, the true purpose of these mysterious little jars is still a totally unsolved enigma. Looking at this timeline really puts the stakes into perspective. If, and it's a big F, But if the battery theory is correct, it means someone was playing around with electricity a full 2,000 years before Volta's famous invention. This isn't just some dusty historical footnote. It would mean we have to completely rewrite the first chapter of our modern technological world. So, what do you think? Was this some lost spark of ancient genius? A mind-blowing technology that was discovered and then just forgotten for thousands of years? Or is this just a classic case of us, modern people, seeing electricity where there was only a really well-designed container for some sacred texts? For now, the Baghdad Battery is one of history's most fascinating what-ifs, and it definitely continues to spark our imagination.